Hello, welcome to the channel.
How to overcome laziness. When people hear my name, they often think of the assembly line, of affordable automobiles, of a man who worked tirelessly to change the world of industry. But what many don't know is that I, too, have faced mornings when I did not want to rise. Moments when my mind whispered, "You can delay this until tomorrow." Laziness, you see, is not an enemy that exists outside of us. It is an enemy that lives within. It is subtle, persuasive, and patient. And if left unchecked, it will rob you of your years, your ambitions, and your potential. I have always believed that the world is run by those who show up not once, not occasionally, but consistently. The greatest ideas mean nothing if they remain trapped in a mind too idle to act. A dream without discipline becomes a burden, and laziness is the chain that keeps it locked. Now, you might think that laziness is a matter of willpower alone, that if you simply try harder, you'll overcome it. That's only partially true. Laziness is often not a lack of desire, but a lack of clarity, purpose, and structure. And I learned this not from books or philosophy, but from the factory floor. When I started working on the idea of producing affordable cars for the average American, I wasn't just facing engineering challenges. I was facing the inertia of human nature, both my own and that of my team. We had to work day after day, repeating tasks that seemed endless, facing failures that felt personal. In such moments, the temptation to rest just for a while was enormous. But I discovered a truth. Motion breeds more motion, and stillness breeds more stillness. If you are lazy today, tomorrow will not magically change that. Laziness compounds like debt. One postponed task becomes 2, then 10. Before you know it, you're living a life of avoidance, rather than a life of achievement. So how do you overcome it? First, you must define your purpose so clearly that it burns away hesitation. When I envisioned a car for every family, it wasn't just a business goal, it was a mission. I saw the farmers who had to travel miles to the nearest town, the workers who lost hours commuting on unreliable transport. I wasn't just building machines, I was building freedom. That kind of vision can drag you out of bed before the sun rises, even on the days you feel like staying under the covers. Second, you must build systems that make laziness difficult. When we designed the assembly line, it wasn't just about efficiency, it was about momentum. The line kept moving, and when the line moved, the men moved. There was no time to stop and drift into idleness. If you want to overcome laziness, put yourself in situations where you must act. Surround yourself with expectations, with people and processes that demand your attention. Third, you must start small, but never stop. Many people fail to overcome laziness because they imagine they must make a grand leap all at once. But great factories are built brick by brick. If you can't work for 8 hours, start with 1. If you can't run a mile, walk for 10 minutes. The victory is not in the size of the step, but in the fact that you took it at all. Laziness hates beginnings, so your job is to begin every day without negotiation. Fourth, you must train your mind to see work not as a punishment, but as a privilege. Too many people see effort as something to be endured, rather than embraced. But I tell you this, the ability to work is a gift. Every hammer swung, every problem solved, every customer served, these are opportunities to shape the world in your image. Laziness thrives in the belief that life owes you something. It dies when you realize that life owes you nothing and that everything you have will be earned by your own 2 hands. And lastly, you must be ruthless with your excuses. The mind is a master at self-deception. It will tell you that you're too tired, that the timing isn't right, that you'll start tomorrow. If you listen, you will be a servant to your own weakness. I have heard every excuse from men on the factory floor: injuries, weather, even bad dreams. But the truth is, 90% of these excuses are nothing more than laziness dressed in polite clothing. When I look back on my life, I see that every major step forward began with a decision to act in the face of reluctance. There is no magic formula. There is no secret. Laziness is beaten not once, but every single day, through the simple act of doing the thing you said you would do, whether you feel like it or not. You will never feel ready. You will never feel like working when the bed is warm and the day is cold. But if you wait for the feeling, you will wait forever. The cure is action. Not thinking about action, not planning for action, just action. And once you act, you will discover something remarkable. The work itself creates the energy you thought you lacked. The first movement is the hardest, but it sets the whole machine of your life in motion. Just as an engine roars to life with the turn of a key, your mind roars to life when you engage it in purposeful work. So my advice is simple. Stop asking yourself if you are ready. Stop waiting for motivation. Instead, choose a task, however small, and begin. Begin now, not tomorrow, not someday. Because someday is the favorite word of the lazy, and it is the grave of ambition. Laziness, in my eyes, is not just about lying in bed too long or avoiding a task. It's a habit of mind. It's a quiet surrender that begins long before the body stops moving. I've met men who appeared busy all day, yet accomplished nothing because their minds had settled into a kind of comfortable idleness. Their hands moved, but their will did not. The first step to conquering laziness is to identify it in all its forms. Sometimes it hides behind the face of rest, and rest is necessary, but only when it serves the purpose of renewing strength. More often than not, laziness wears the mask of procrastination. You tell yourself, I'll do this after I have my coffee. Then after your coffee, you say, I'll start after lunch. And before you know it, the day is gone. When I was working in the early days of the Detroit Automobile Company, there were moments when the work ahead seemed endless. Parts failed, suppliers fell behind, and we had more problems than solutions. My mind whispered, you could slow down. Take it easy. No one will blame you. But here's the truth. No one else may blame you, but you will blame yourself. And that guilt, that quiet knowledge that you could have done more, is far heavier than any day of hard labor. You see, laziness is not defeated in one grand battle. It is defeated in 1,000 small choices. Every morning you wake, you face a decision. Will you serve your purpose or your comfort? Let me tell you something I learned from the factory floor. Rhythm is the enemy of laziness. When we built the moving assembly line in 1913, something magical happened. The work began to carry itself forward. Each man's task was clear, each station timed, and each movement predictable. There was no question of whether to work, only how to work better. The system didn't allow for hesitation. That is what you must create in your own life. A system so strong that laziness cannot find a place to sit. Here's a truth I want you to remember. Laziness thrives in uncertainty. It dies in routine. If you do not know exactly what you are supposed to do when you wake, you will spend your day deciding rather than doing. And deciding all the time is exhausting. It drains the very energy you need for action. So set your tasks the night before. Decide today what tomorrow will bring. When you rise, there should be no question of what comes next. Another weapon against laziness is accountability. I have always believed that men work harder when they know their work matters to someone else. If you promise a friend, a partner, or even a customer that you will deliver something by a certain time, you will feel the weight of that promise, and that weight, if you honor it, will pull you forward. Without accountability, it is far too easy to break promises to yourself. And then there is the matter of vision, not just having one, but holding it so clearly in your mind that it burns away the fog of hesitation. When I thought of the Model T, I didn't just see a car. I saw the farmer able to sell his goods faster. I saw the child visiting relatives without a day-long journey in a horse-drawn carriage. I saw America connected by roads and freedom of movement. That vision made me impatient to work. If you struggle with laziness, perhaps your vision is not yet strong enough to pull you. A weak vision lets you linger. A powerful one makes inaction unbearable. But let me also say this. Laziness is not always about weakness. Sometimes it is a symptom. If you are truly exhausted, perhaps you have been working on the wrong thing or in the wrong way for too long. I do not believe in working without rest because rest is part of work. A man who never stops is not industrious. He is foolish, and he will burn himself out before his work is done. The key is to rest deliberately, not accidentally. Rest is a tool, not an escape. You may also need to face the hard truth that fear often hides behind laziness. I've seen it countless times. A man will avoid a task, not because he is too tired, but because he is afraid to fail, afraid to look foolish, afraid the work will reveal his limits. Laziness is often just fear in disguise, and the cure for fear is not waiting, it is doing. The moment you take a step, fear begins to weaken. I've learned that the smallest act can destroy the strongest hesitation. In the winter of 1910, I faced a design flaw in the transmission of our car. Weeks of thinking produced nothing but frustration. So I stopped thinking and began experimenting. The first attempt failed, the second was worse, but by the seventh try, the solution emerged. I realized something vital. Thinking about the work without doing it is the fastest road to laziness. Action, even imperfect, is the antidote. I tell you this not as a man who has never been idle, but as one who has fought it all his life. The battle never truly ends. Each day you must rise and decide again. And the more often you decide in favor of action, the easier it becomes until working is as natural to you as breathing. So if you want to overcome laziness, stop waiting for motivation. Stop waiting for the perfect moment. Begin now. Begin small. Begin before you are ready. And as the days pass, you will find that the very act of moving forward creates the strength you thought you lacked. Now I want to speak to you not as an industrialist or an inventor, but as a fellow human being who has faced the same internal battles you face. We are all susceptible to the voice of laziness. It whispers with the same tone to the rich and the poor, the successful and the struggling. It says, you've done enough today. Take it easy. There's always tomorrow. But here's what I've learned after a lifetime of work. Tomorrow is a liar. Tomorrow is the sweetest promise that never comes. If you rely on it, you will waste your life waiting for a day that does not exist. So what can be done? Let me share the framework I have used all my life to keep laziness from getting the upper hand. 1. Set a starting time, not a finishing time. Most people plan their workday around when they will finish. They say, I'll work until 5 o'clock, or I'll stop once I'm tired. That thinking is dangerous because it gives you permission to delay the start. I always set a starting time, and I honor it as if it were an appointment with a customer. If I said I would be in the workshop at 7 a.m., then at 6:59 I was already there, hands ready. Once you start, you'll almost always do more than you intended. 2. Break work into chunks. Laziness thrives when a task feels too big to tackle. In the early days when we were building prototypes, the whole project seemed overwhelming. If I thought about everything that needed to be done, my mind would stall, so I broke it down. Today, I would design a single part. Tomorrow, I would test one mechanism. By breaking the work into smaller steps, I tricked my mind into starting, and once you start, the momentum carries you. 3. Remove the decision. If you leave your work to be decided in the moment, you will give laziness a seat at the table. The night before, I always decided exactly what I would work on the next day. I laid out my tools, cleared my desk, and made sure that when I walked in, there was no thinking to do, only working. I treated my own laziness the way I treated machine downtime, by making sure it had no chance to happen. 4. Stay physically engaged. When a man's body is still, his mind begins to wander, and wandering often leads to idleness. I found that simply walking the factory floor, tightening a bolt here, adjusting a part there, kept my energy alive. Even on days when I had no heavy labor to do myself, I stayed on my feet and in motion. Movement breeds more. Movement, stillness breeds decay. 5. Harness the power of public promises. If I committed publicly to a project, I worked twice as hard to see it through. When we announced to the press that the Model T would be ready by a certain date, I had no room for delay. That public promise became a chain that pulled me forward. If you struggle with laziness, tell someone your goal. Better yet, tell many people. Let the weight of their expectations keep you moving. Now let me tell you a personal story, one that taught me how dangerous even a small dose of laziness can be. It was 1901 and I had just left the Detroit Automobile Company after a frustrating year. I had ideas for a new kind of car, lighter and faster, but I was exhausted from the endless disagreements with investors. I told myself I'd take just a week to rest and think. That week became 2, then a month. My workshop stayed closed more days than it was open. I told myself I was waiting for inspiration, but the truth was, I was simply avoiding the work because I feared failing again. One day, Clara, my wife, looked at me across the dinner table and said, "Henry, you're not resting, you're hiding." That hit me harder than any criticism from a factory foreman. She was right. I had let the taste of failure convince me to sit still. The next morning, I forced myself back into the workshop. My hands felt stiff, my mind sluggish. But after an hour of tinkering, I felt the spark return. By the end of that week, I had the beginnings of what would become the sweepstakes race car, a project that not only reignited my passion, but also won me the race that restored my reputation. From that experience, I learned something crucial. You do not wait for energy to begin. You begin to gain energy. Laziness tells you to wait until you feel like it, but you will rarely feel like it until you've started. 6. Create a chain of unbroken days. One of my personal tricks was to mark every productive day on a calendar. If I completed my work for the day, I drew a bold black mark. Over time, those marks formed a chain, and I became determined not to break it. Laziness became my enemy, not because it wasted a day, but because it would break my chain of progress. This is a simple but powerful method because humans hate losing what they've already built. 7. Make work enjoyable, people. Think work is always about discipline, but I made a point to enjoy it. I designed cars because it fascinated me. I experimented with machinery because it felt like solving a puzzle. The more enjoyment you find in your work, the less laziness can tempt you away from it. If your work feels unbearable, perhaps you're doing the wrong kind of work or you've forgotten why you started. You must understand, laziness will never vanish from your life completely. It is part of human nature, just as fatigue and hunger are. The question is not how to eliminate it, but how to keep it too small to control you. And the way you do that is by acting when you're tired, acting when you're unsure, acting when you're afraid. Because in the end, the man who acts will outpace the man who waits every single time. I have often been asked, "Henry, how did you keep going when things seemed impossible?" My answer is always the same. I did not allow myself the luxury of stopping. It wasn't that I never felt tired or that I always wanted to work. It's that I had trained my mind to see inaction as unacceptable. If you truly want to overcome laziness, you must rewire the way you think about it. You must turn it from a harmless habit into something you cannot tolerate. For me, it became a kind of personal insult. Laziness was not just failing to work. It was failing myself, failing my family, failing the vision I had sworn to build. 1. See laziness as theft. Every hour you spend in idleness is an hour stolen from your future. If I wasted a day, I imagined the faces of the workers who depended on me, the families who would not have their cars, the progress delayed by my hesitation. That image lit a fire under me. Laziness wasn't rest, it was robbing me of what could have been built. Once you see laziness as theft, it becomes harder to accept it in your life. 2. Believe that work creates energy. The greatest misconception is that you must feel ready before you start. The truth is, the opposite energy comes from working, not from waiting. I learned this on countless cold mornings when my body begged me to stay in bed. But the moment I began turning a wrench or sketching a design, the fatigue faded. You must truly believe, that the cure for tiredness is often action. 3. Anchor work to identity. When a man says, "I am a worker," or "I am a builder," he begins to live by that standard. I did not just do engineering, I was an engineer. I did not just build cars, I was a car maker. If laziness ever crept in, it felt like a betrayal of who I was. Anchor your work to your identity, and you will feel a natural resistance to letting laziness dictate your actions. 4. Focus on legacy, not comfort. Comfort is temporary. Legacy is eternal. I knew that one day my bones would be dust, but my work could outlive me. That thought alone was enough to make me push through the moments of weakness. Comfort never built a factory, never forged steel, never changed a nation. The men who shaped history were not the ones who took the easiest path. They were the ones who accepted discomfort as the cost of greatness. 5. Accept that motivation is overrated. Motivation is a fair weather friend. It's there when the sun is shining, when the mood is right, but it disappears when life grows hard. Discipline, however, remains. I never relied on the feeling of wanting to work. Instead, I relied on the habit of working. When you no longer debate whether to act, when action becomes your default, laziness loses its power. 6. Use time as a weapon. Time is the one resource you cannot replace. I measured my days not in hours, but in results. 10 hours of half-hearted effort was worth less to me than one focused, productive hour. That is why I guarded my time so fiercely. I cut out unnecessary meetings, refused distractions, and focused only on what moved the vision forward. The less you waste, the less laziness can steal. Let me tell you about a day in 1912, a day that taught me just how fragile momentum can be. We were close to finalizing the assembly line, but a minor part shortage stalled production. I told myself I'd take a short break, maybe even go fishing for the afternoon. But halfway to the river, I turned the car around. Why? Because I realized that even a single day away from the problem would weaken the urgency I felt. I could not risk losing that momentum. By staying, we found a temporary workaround that kept production moving. That one decision saved us weeks of delay. And here is the lesson. Laziness doesn't always strike in the form of total inaction. Sometimes it's just a little drift, a harmless pause, a small delay. But like a gear slipping out of place, that small delay can slow the entire machine of your life. 7. Keep the vision close. I carried my vision with me at all times, not in a notebook, but in my mind. I could close my eyes and see the roads filled with automobiles, the farms connected to markets, the small towns thriving from new access to goods and people. That vision was more than a goal, it was a compass. Whenever laziness tried to pull me off course, I would revisit that picture in my mind, and it would remind me why the work mattered. The battle against laziness is won in the mind long before it's won in the body. Change your relationship with work, and you change your relationship with life itself. When you begin to see effort as a privilege, when you recognize that action is the very thing that fuels your strength, you will no longer be a victim of your moods. And remember, the reward for beating laziness is not just the work you complete, it is the life you build as a result. Every time you choose action over idleness, you step closer to the life you want and further from the life you'll regret. I have always believed that laziness does not survive in a well-ordered day. The mind, like a machine, works best when it has a clear sequence of operations. Just as you would never run an engine without knowing its proper function, you should never run your day without knowing exactly how it will go. In my working years, my days were not left to chance. I didn't rely on feeling productive to get work done. I relied on structure, my daily framework for defeating laziness. 1. Rise early, before the world can distract you. I have never met a man who wasted his mornings and achieved great things. The early hours are when the mind is sharpest, free from the noise of the day. I often rose before sunrise, and while others slept, I was already setting the course of the day. This gave me an advantage over laziness. It hadn't yet woken up to argue with me. 2. Start with a physical task. One of the worst mistakes is to begin the day with idle thought. When the first thing you do is move, sharpen a tool, inspect a part, walk the floor, you wake the body and, with it, the mind. On the factory floor, I often began by tightening bolts or inspecting machines. This was not about micromanaging. It was about igniting momentum. 3. Set 3 main objectives. Each morning, I decided on 3 essential outcomes for the day. Not 50 tasks, not 103. These were the things that, if completed, would move the business forward. Everything else was secondary. By focusing on fewer, more important goals, I robbed laziness of its favorite excuse, being too busy with trivial work. 4. Work in time blocks. I divided my day into blocks, periods of concentrated work followed by short breaks. The key was that during each block, there was no wandering, no unnecessary conversation, no distractions. On the assembly line, each section had its own timed rhythm. I simply applied the same principle to my own schedule. 5. Inspect progress. Midday, halfway through the day, I reviewed what had been done. If I was behind schedule, I adjusted not tomorrow, but immediately. Laziness loves when you say, "I'll fix it later." I refuse to give it that opening. 6. End with the next day's plan. Before leaving for the evening, I set up the next day. I laid out any necessary tools, wrote down the 3 objectives, and left everything ready so that the following morning began without hesitation. This single habit alone prevented countless wasted hours. How I handled days I didn't feel like working. Even with structure, there were days when I simply didn't want to work. On those days, I relied on 2 principles. Start with 10 minutes. I told myself I only had to work for 10 minutes. Almost without fail, those 10 minutes became hours. The hardest part is starting. Switch to a smaller task. If a major task felt too heavy, I chose something simpler but still useful. Completing even a small job broke the hold of idleness. Why rest was also part of the plan. Now you might think I worked every waking hour. That is not true. I respected rest, not as a luxury, but as maintenance. Just as machines need downtime to avoid breakdown, so do men. But here's the difference. My rest was intentional, not accidental. I never fell into rest because of laziness. I scheduled it with the same discipline as work. When I rested, I truly rested. I stepped away from the factory, spent time with family, or engaged in quiet hobbies. This meant that when it was time to work, I had no excuse to hold back. The most important habit: never let the chain break. I've mentioned this before, but it's worth repeating. Every day I acted, I marked it down. Over weeks, those marks formed a chain. Laziness was no longer a minor inconvenience. It was a threat to the chain I had built. I would work a little longer, push a little harder, just to protect that unbroken line of effort. If you build your life this way, with clear starts, defined priorities, and deliberate rest, you leave laziness with nowhere to hide. It doesn't get to creep in just for a day because your structure doesn't allow it. Mental techniques to defeat laziness. 1. The don't think, do rule. The mind loves to delay the start of work because that's where the greatest resistance lies. I developed a rule. If you decide to do something, begin immediately without thinking it over. Any debate with yourself gives laziness a chance to win. When we were building the first car prototypes, some parts were so complex that I could have spent half a day just thinking about them. Instead, I learned to pick up the tool and start right away. The solution often came during the work, not before it. 2. Instant shift of focus. If I caught myself thinking later, I immediately shifted my attention to the smallest action I could take right now. Not assembling the entire engine, just tightening one bolt. Not designing the entire car, just sketching a single component. Small actions break the chain of hesitation. 3. Imaginary accountability. I imagined that every task was a promise made to someone I respected. My father, a trusted engineer, or even my future self. That image instantly gave the task more weight. Laziness rarely survives under the pressure of personal honor. 4. The what will I lose if I stop now? Question. Laziness often tricks you by showing only the comfort of rest. I trained myself to ask, what will this cost me if I stop? Often the answer was, lost days, missed opportunities, damaged reputation. That thought struck harder than any short-term pleasure from doing nothing. 5. The finished picture. Whenever I felt the temptation to delay, I imagined the work completed, the engine running flawlessly, the car rolling out of the factory gates. Seeing the end result in my mind stirred a desire to see it in reality, and that pushed me to act immediately. 6. The do it to do it principle. Not every piece of work has to aim for a grand breakthrough. Sometimes I work simply to keep myself moving. Like on an assembly line, not every bolt changes the world, but without it, the car won't move. Constant action in itself is a weapon against laziness. 7. The power of shame. A simple but powerful tool. I imagined having to explain to someone why I had done nothing all day. If the excuse sounded ridiculous, I went to work. Laziness doesn't stand up well to the mirror of self-respect. 8. Turn work into a game. The human mind loves challenge. When I faced a tedious task, I reframed it as a personal contest. Can I do this faster? Can I do it with fewer mistakes? Can I make it more efficient than yesterday? This playful competition kept my interest alive and pushed me forward when the task itself was not exciting. 9. Use momentum as a tool. The hardest part of any work is the beginning. Once you've started, the motion carries you. Your choice. I used momentum, deliberately starting with a quick, easy job so that the satisfaction of finishing it would propel me into the harder work. A small victory early in the day makes it much harder for laziness to regain control. 10. Change the environment. If I felt my energy fading, I didn't just sit there and fight it. I moved. I walked to a different part of the factory, changed my workstation, or went outside for a few minutes of fresh air. Laziness thrives in stale surroundings. A simple change of environment often refreshes the mind enough to get back into action. 11. Speak action into existence. If my mind began to stall, I would speak my next action out loud. Now I'm going to check the gearbox. Saying it made it real. The act of verbalizing a decision is like signing a contract with yourself. It becomes harder to ignore. 12. Shrink the task to beat the fear. Many people mistake laziness for a lack of discipline, when in truth, they're simply afraid of the size of the work ahead. When I recognized this in myself, I cut the task down to something so small that fear had no ground to stand on. Once you start, the fear fades, and laziness follows it out the door. 13. The one more step. Rule: when I wanted to stop for the day, I would tell myself, do just one more step. Sometimes it was one more drawing, one more calculation, or one more test. That single extra effort often led to another, and before I knew it, I had doubled my output. Laziness hates persistence. It's a habit that starves it. 14. Visualize the consequences of delay. When the thought of, I can do this tomorrow, crept in, I forced myself to imagine tomorrow with double the workload today's unfinished task piled on top of tomorrow's plan. The image was heavy enough to make me act right then and there. 15. Attach the task to a greater purpose. I never worked just to finish a job. I worked because each task was part of something bigger. Whether it was a small bolt or a full design, I connected it to the larger mission, putting America on wheels. That connection turned even the smallest jobs into essential contributions, making laziness feel like sabotage. Why these triggers? Work laziness is rarely about physical tiredness. It is about mental resistance. These triggers work because they don't try to eliminate resistance entirely. They bypass it. They don't wait for inspiration, they force movement. And once movement starts, the mind quickly follows. You must understand, overcoming laziness isn't about one heroic burst of effort. It's about building a way of thinking and living that doesn't allow laziness to survive. A man can have every skill in the world, but if he cannot master himself, if he cannot act when he least wants to, those skills will rot unused. Discipline is freedom. Many men think discipline is a prison, a restriction on their freedom. I discovered the opposite. Discipline is the only thing that gives you freedom. Without it, you are a slave to moods, to laziness, to fear. Because I disciplined myself to rise early, I was free to build what I wanted. Because I disciplined myself to work when I didn't feel like it, I was free to seize opportunities that others missed. Because I disciplined myself to keep moving, I was free from the regret of wasted years. Why laziness is a silent killer. Laziness doesn't destroy you all at once. It steals from you little by little. One delayed task becomes two. One wasted hour becomes a wasted day. And before you know it, years have passed and you are still standing in the same place. You don't notice the theft until it is too late. That is why you must fight it daily. Not as a grand battle, but as a constant defense. The value of uncomfortable effort. Comfort never built anything worth having. Every great achievement is paid for an effort that, in the moment, is uncomfortable. I learned to lean into that discomfort, to see it as a sign I was doing something that mattered. If you can work when it is hard, when you are tired, cold, uncertain, then there is no situation that can stop you. The compound effect of action laziness compounds into failure, but action compounds into success. A single act today may seem small, but over years those acts pile into something extraordinary. Every bolt tightened, every meeting attended, every test run, these built the Ford Motor Company. Do not underestimate the power of doing something today, even if it seems too small to matter. Never wait for inspiration. If I had waited for the perfect moment to build my first car, you would not know my name today. Inspiration is a luxury, not a requirement. Most of my best ideas came to me while I was already working, not while I was sitting idle. You cannot control when inspiration arrives, but you can control whether you are moving when it does. And if it finds you moving, it will find you ready. A final word. If there is one thing I want you to take from my life, it is this. The world belongs to the man who shows up every day, ready to work, no matter how he feels. You don't need to feel motivated. You don't need to have perfect conditions. You don't even need to believe you will succeed. You only need to act and keep acting. Laziness is beaten not with willpower alone, but with structure, with purpose, and with the refusal to negotiate with yourself. Every day you choose action over idleness, you are not just winning a small battle. You are building a life you will be proud of. When I am gone, my factories may rust, my cars may be replaced, but the habits that built them, the relentless discipline, the daily choice to move forward, those are eternal, and they are yours for the taking. So tomorrow morning, when you wake and hear that quiet voice saying, "Not today," remember this. That voice is the thief of your future. Do not let it speak twice. Get up, begin, and don't stop.